Tranquila, tranquila. Tranquila, tranquila, tranquila. Ulula, ulula, ululele. Jali wo, jali, jali. Ah, sorry.
Christ feed the multitude with only one loaf of bread. Poor people, there is something for you. Don't let the pressures of the system get upon your head. Poor people, there is something for you. Mankind care not for his sisters anymore. Still there is something for you. Written in the book of life, we shall live forevermore. There will be something for Rasta works a manifest and it a blossom and a bloom. Nature always run its course, the tide is rising with the moon. It only takes a spark to put a fire to the fume. What is hidden in the dark shall be revealed so very soon. Tell Pharaoh free the prisoners from the dungeons and the doom. Tell the youths to not to dread and Babylon put them in platoon. The trials and the perils deeper than the blue lagoon. Them I want to know them history, you know, sister, them alone. Christ fed the multitude with only one loaf of bread. Poor people, there is something for you. Don't let the pressures of the system get upon your head. Poor people, there is something for you. Mankind care not for his sisters anymore. Still there is something for you. Each and every time you see we forward off a tour, there will be something for. Jah gave Moses 10 commandments upon 2 tablets of stone. Led Israel out of Egypt and then promised them a home. Samson slew the Philistines with a donkey jawbone, and David slew Goliath with a two-way crown. Blessed be the man where walketh not in a the war zone. Blessed be the man where hear not in a peon ground. Blessed be the herbs that keep we iron a peon stone. Fire for your man where sit down in a Babylon throne. Careless woman go a dance and left them picnic them alone. Cannot take care of yourself, they get the and ready in a room. Population under pressure, still them have more money clown. And all the wasted love that has been lost has now been found. Christ fed the multitude with only one loaf of bread. Poor people, there is something for you. Don't let the pressures of the system get upon your head. Poor people, there is something for you. Mankind care not for his sisters anymore. Still there is something for you. Written in the book of life, we shall live forevermore. Still there is something. Christ feed the multitude with only one loaf of bread. Christ feed the multitude with only one loaf of bread. Christ feed the multitude with only one loaf of bread. Christ feed the multitude.
All right. I think we're here. How are we doing?
Oh, amazing.
Wonderful. Glad to be here.
All right, thanks everyone for being here. I think there's somebody that doesn't have in headphones, and I can hear an echo through your speaker. I'm not sure if that's Chris,
is that me?
BRG? Might be. Do you have headphones by chance? Yeah, I think it is you because I can't hear an echo through Black Red Guard stream. But Chris, do you have a pair of headphones by chance?
Yeah, let me go grab them real quick.
Oh, yeah, because I muted mine, and
okay.
I guess it was his.
Okay, well that's headphones will definitely help if you do have them. Yeah, it's definitely through yours as well.
Okay, hold on, let me see.
It's okay if you don't have headphones. Then all we need to do is just mute yourself when you're not speaking. Is all.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. So just to get everyone in the stream acquainted with what's going on here, you may be familiar with Chris Marsh. You may be familiar with Black Red Guard. You may be familiar with me or not. I'm not even really sure. I haven't spoken to you all for a very long time. So here's the thing. We've had some pretty interesting conversations in the last several months about whether there's an actual synthesis that exists between Pan-Africanism and communism. And there seems to be a couple of distinct strains, or probably about 3 distinct strains of Pan-Africanism that plays itself out that people are familiar with. And when I saw that Chris Marsh, who is an educator, runs the Omni-African Collective, has a book club, has some very educational YouTube videos. And when I saw that you were having conversations about Marx and reading Capital, at the very same time, oh, my mic is choppy. Oh, okay, hang on a second. I'll adjust my gain. Yeah, so when I saw that there were some conversations that Black Red Guard was having as well, and doing very educational videos on the history of communism, educational videos on whether or not Cuba and China count as socialism, what a revolution looks like, and on top of that, having some pretty interesting convos on people whose families have fled from communism, and what life should look like in a post-revolutionary scenario. I thought it would be a really good opportunity to have these two great minds come together, not necessarily for a debate, but to have a synthetical conversation on what Pan-Africanism and socialism actually looks like. So I'm not going to keep everyone too long. If you don't mind, I'll let you all to introduce yourself, beginning with Chris. Chris, would you mind? Chris Marsh, you mind introducing yourself?
I am Chris. I'm Chris Marshall, the co-founder and director of research at the Omni-African, like a collective. I am editor. I am I'm an archivist. I am a writer. I just came out. I'm part of the Kofi Pie side, like a research team. I am, I'm an editor. I'm a writer. And just a normal everyday, African trying to dismantle, the culture of global white domination.
All right, thank you very much. And Black Red Guard, you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Black Red Guard. My name is Chris, but considering that we have another Chris in here, you can call me Black Red Guard. I have a pretty decent YouTube channel. I talk about Maoism and why the hell Black people should give a damn about it. Also an organizer. I chair an organization called For the People STL, FTP STL. It's heavily influenced by Maoism, but it's not an explicitly Maoist organization. And it's a multinational organization, which means that it accepts people from all nationalities. So pretty big supporter of multinational organizing. I know some other Pan-African comrades will be like, what the fuck is he doing organizing with crackers? But maybe one day I'll be like, oh, fuck all this. But for now, I think it's a pretty decent model. Also a writer. My medium is at Black Red Guard. And again, I basically try to educate our people as to why like Marx ain't just for old white dudes. So that's pretty much what I do.
All right, perfect. So what I wanted to do first, this is not, like as I say, it's not going to be a debate, but I think it would be worthwhile to get the viewers and each other familiar with your points of view and where you're coming from a dialectical standpoint. So if you don't mind going for an opening statement, Black Redguard, just talk about your own views on Pan-Africanism and socialism, how you believe that they can be synthesized, and any sort of arguments that you'd like to make to Chris Marsh.
Sure. When we talk about Pan-Africanism, the most advanced wing, like there's a variety of different strands or tranches of Pan-Africanism. You have whatever the hell Dr. Umar wants, and you have Pan-African socialism, meaning that we can't just we can't run the white folks off the continent. We can't run everybody else that's eating up all of our wealth off the continent and then just be like, okay, now we're going to set up black capitalism. So when I talk about Pan-Africanism personally, we have to necessarily talk about socialism. What is socialism? It's not, okay, the proletariat gets together and follows these old dead dudes. No. Socialism is a living thing, and each country and each revolutionary project has its own path, its own concrete path to socialism. A lot of people have run across these dogmatic white Marxists that are like, "Oh, you have to do it this way." Bro, y'all ain't had a revolution since the Russians, and they ain't all white. So, when we talk about socialism, we're basically talking about the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, dictatorship does not mean mini Stalin going around shooting folks in the back of the head. That's a distortion. We talk about dictatorship of the proletariat. We have to take into account the Marxist principle that government, states are for the interests of a certain class. For example, what is the United States? It's a dictatorship of white supremacist capitalism, imperialism. And when we talk about the dictatorship of the proletariat, we're talking about the dictatorship, the state of the most oppressed that represents its interests. States are basically armed bodies of people who enforce their will upon the other parts of the population that are not in the ruling class. For example, in the United States, we have the U.S. military that enforces the will of the capitalist, imperialist, white supremacists that run this country all over the world. We have the police that enforce the will of the white supremacist, capitalist, imperialists here in the hoods and in the barrios and in the trailer parks. And under the dictatorship of the proletariat, I, as a Maoist, believe that it will be necessary to suppress the bourgeoisie, both arising from within the party. This is another Maoist principle, that a new bourgeoisie can arise from within the party. Like, yeah, okay, we have made the revolution now. Let's just see what we can eat up for ourselves. So it's necessary to mobilize the masses to combat against that. And furthermore, there's going to be imperialists that can be like, oh, they're going to liberate themselves. Oh, hell no. So we have to organize to fight against that as well. So that's essentially where I'm coming from. And we'll be trying to synthesize that with Pan-Africanism. We have to realize that Africa has been exploited and oppressed as a continent. It's not just, oh, they're doing this in Nigeria, they're doing this in Ghana, they're doing this in Mali, they're doing this in... No. Capitalism, imperialism is a global system. It doesn't recognize borders. As a matter of fact, it drew most of these borders in Africa. Like, you have entire ethnic groups of people that have been divided between these arbitrary divisions. Like, didn't know before the white folks came, before the Europeans came, we didn't know shit about no Nigeria. We were Wolof, Dogon, Yoruba, Fon, and now they just arrogated all these people into these states, and they wonder why there's all these conflicts and stuff like that. So when we talk about Pan-Africanism, that literally means all Africa. That means the diaspora, and that means the continent unified. And it has to be on a socialist basis, because we've seen how colonialism, okay, they tear down the French, British, German flag, what have you, and then they raise these in the so-called independent states, and you still got A.G. Simmons, you still got Unilever, you still got Royal Dutch Shell, all these European imperialist companies that are still looting the continent. You have black faces in high places. I mean, we've had a black president of the United States. Yet this process still continues. And what a lot of comrades, Pan-African comrades, don't realize, what a lot of new African Black people in particular don't realize, is that we're fighting against the whole system here. Like we got Kamala Harris and Barack Obama and all these people, they ain't did shit for us because they served a class. So that's the main thing that I'm trying to, that with my writing and with my education work, with my organizing, that I try to promote. And in terms of Maoism, it's not just, we got to do everything that Mao said to do, because Mao made some mistakes. That's why China has reverted to capitalism. And we can go into more of those mistakes later. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm coming from.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Chris, would you like to lead with your opening statements? Sorry. Boom.
Oh, yeah, sure. So my position is maybe a more ancient and maybe, more, creative or, kind of innovative. I present a more, organic version, of like Pan-Africanism. So one of the things that we stress at the Omni African Collective is the importance of human development. So our political institution that we operate off of is the Mbunge. The Mbunge is it's the political institution which is at the center, like a village, right? And what creates that Mbunge though is first the Kendezi. Now, the Kendezi, that is that is the art of babysitting, right? So the babysitter, like it's called, is actually called the Ndezi, right? And that's the person, whether it be a young person or it be an old person, that takes care of the children, right? And one of the reasons why that's important, it frees African women up, to do, military actions, to do, agricultural actions. So they work hand in hand. Part of my issue with socialist and communist governance is that too often it has reverted into authoritarian styles of governance. Now, I'm not going to get on the Cold War nonsense, right? But what's important is that part of the reason why a Soviet Union fell was that they lost the cultural revolution, right? And the reason they lost it was that they didn't liberate women, they didn't liberate children. And I think a lot of the things that are missing is that African culture that is baked in with a lot of communal, with a lot of cooperative concepts, right? Even things, like Ubuntu, right? They all work with Kendezi, with the Mbunge, and even within the Mbunge, there's debate, there's education, there's a lot of intellectual work, right? That goes on in order to sharpen that indigenous African, that indigenous African, that indigenous African political institution. So the reason why it's so important is that we kind of got to work from the ground up, because one of the things that I want to get away from is the vanguard concept. Because what happens with the vanguard concept, whether we talk about Nkrumah, Mugabe, in Togo, Idi Amin, or even Sekou Touré, what happened was that there was great intentions, but the political practice turned into this ruling elite that imposed their will on the people, right? And a main thing that kind of bothered me that I saw, and this is reading, Dwayne Omowale's work, was that a lot of the Marxist and socialist, governments, they dismantled these, traditional African markets, right? And what happened is that when a CIA came, right, they didn't have the masses of the people, right? So one of the things that I like offer is that we start using more indigenous, political African like institutions that are born out of the people, so that even my Pan-Africanism is shifting less from a cultural nationalist view, and not to say they don't have great insights from Malefi Asante, Dr. Wade Nobles, but more so with the Shekantha joke that operates more so of even how we do the geographical borders has to really lean more so on the people, right? So my idea of Pan-Africanism is starting over and just scratching all of the colonial borders. So in the way that we do that is that we ground, shout out happy birthday, to Walter Rodney, but we ground with our brothers and sisters and make sure that we develop institutions with the people and not impose our will. Because one of the things I noticed with reading, Dwayne Omawali's work was that there was never really, any economic independence from the West and sometimes the East. So what happened was that there was a very codependent, just relationship with Nkrumah and the British, Mugabe in the U.S. and I guess the British too. It's the U.S. and the British, and then yeah. So I think, and then me being an atheist and having an anti like religious just position is that one of the things that I've noticed is that religion is political. And John Henry Clark, he said every major like religion operates as a political party. And I didn't notice this until when we looked at the Mbonji, and what happened is they placed Jesus Christ inside the Mbonji. And this is in Congo, and more particular, with the Bakongo people. So a lot of times when people say that my anti, Abrahamic religion like perspective is just so crazy, it's really from a genuine political perspective, because what I'm noticing is that there's no tolerance for African ways of life, whether it be African spirituality, African, like religion. And what's happening is that there's no tolerance. So even when you were talking about the Uyghur whole situation in China, right? I don't even believe a lot of that propaganda, but the worst, like the most horrible thing that I'm picking up on is that much worse things are happening to African people with Islam, with Christianity. And I even saw where even Shaka Zulu, he had to kill witch doctors and I think diviners, which in a lot of ways was very similar to Mao, because superstition had taken over African culture to the point that we couldn't solve our own like problems, right? And what I'm noticing is that African culture is very fluid. Now, a lot of people will get into the whole African essentialists and everything that Africa did was good and everything white people did was bad. No, I'm not into that. But what I am saying is that much of African culture that we talk about is not really utilized, especially not politically. So I think one of the things that we even got to tap into and even remember is that even the idea of dialectics and unified opposites, that came from the Egyptian mystery school. So, a lot of that isn't even European. But I mean, just in conclusion, my approach is that we start establishing social and, indigenous, political institutions, so that we develop the people that can develop the organizations that, develop the government, so that we're not talking at the people, but we're building like with the people. And that's why at Omni-African, we say building community pending revolution.
Okay, and that actually brings me, that segues right into the next question that I wanted to ask the two of you. Can you give me a sense, Chris? I'll start with you because Black Red Card went last the first time. Can you give the viewers your vision of what Pan-Africanism and Pan-African revolution looks like through an indigenous perspective? Now, you talked about, for example, like the Mbongi Forum of not just government but social relations. The form in which everybody has a voice. You talked about the overemphasis on the vanguard and who gets to be a part of it. So, in your perspective, what would the lead up to revolution and revolution itself look like from this indigenous Pan-African perspective?
Well, I think starting off, it would look like the Maroon societies. It would look like Maroonage. So a lot of people are waiting for a conventional, political organization where everything is kind of rigid and archaic and something you can see. I know people mention like, Dr. Umar, and there's a lot of people who say they're African centered, but a lot of them are very Eurocentric, just with, dashikis on. So it's extremely important to understand that. So what a revolution would look like from an indigenous perspective is that you would see a lot of religious institutions, be destroyed. I mean, to be quite honest, like when you look at what was going on with Kwame Nkrumah, and if you look a book that I was reading, it's in our, hold on, how do you say it? It's In This Part of the World by Kwesi Kanadu, right? He talks about how there was a lot of opposition to the mission schools that Nkrumah got behind, right? So I think one of the things you will see a lot of opposition to just Abrahamic religion. You would see a lot of opposition to alien forms like of organization, of government, because of the material consequence that these institutions have caused. So it would be a lot. It would look a lot like the Haitian Revolution, but on a much larger scale. But I think the thing that you would see is that there wouldn't be as much, assimilation. There would just be complete destruction. But then it would be beautiful reconstruction in terms of building up new institutions where, whether it be gender, whether it be culture, whether it be identity, it would be a lot more fluid. It would be a lot more free form, and it would be an environment that would foster way more creativity. Because right now, I think that too often we're always trying to accommodate everybody else who is consistently trying, to destroy us. And the reality is, each group of people's, set of beliefs, they're political and they're imposing them on us. And I keep arriving at the same conclusions, right? And whether it be Judaism, Christianity, capitalism, and unfortunately, the authoritarian style, like of, socialism, which kind of goes against even the core principles, because it's got to be more representative, so, even like my thing would be that on a micro level, we have to be a part of developing the people that would not only be a part of, organizations, but, part of communities. So there would be a complete cultural like revolution, where a lot of the stuff that you see that people identify with being normal would just simply go away, like it did with Shaka Zulu. And he wasn't even talking about Abrahamic stuff. He was talking about superstitious. He was talking about like superstitious stuff in African culture. So I think one of the things we got to be careful of is that a lot of stuff that we think is like concrete and absolute is very relative. And if something isn't serving the people's interests, you can get rid of it, And that's why I'm not so much on it's got to be this way, it's got to be that way, because I think forms of governance can really vary depending on the circumstances and conditions. And that's why I really appreciate Cabral, because what he did really wasn't Marxist. It was more Maroonage. And when you look at how he was able to create that leadership kind of framework, we haven't really seen that outside of course, the Maroons. So my thing would be that you would see what a lot of people would call it anarchism, but in a lot of ways, I don't think African people really need that, because it's already there. And we're the best at like decentralized organization. So I just kind of feel like there's a lot of stuff that's already there. But I think where the confusion is that it's synthesized with spirituality, with sociology, with politics, and like, of course, economics. So it's one and the same. So when people are talking about certain concepts, they all work in harmony, and there's not the opposing pair kind of European worldview that like Marimba Ani talks about, but it's the complementary pairs. And a lot of these systems work hand in hand. That's why I talked about the Kendezi and the Mbanji. So yeah, you would see a lot of stuff just be destroyed because of what political mechanism it served to destroy our people, both you know, physically, you know, and like just psychologically. And yeah, so that's what you would see.
Got that. And Black Red Guard, can you articulate what your vision of a lead up to revolution and Pan-African revolution itself would look like under the tendency that you subscribe to?
Sure. As a Maoist, I adhere to the, pretty sure everybody here knows the dictum that political power grows from the barrel of a gun. Or to quote the Communist Party of Peru, salve el poder, todo es ilusión. Without power, everything is illusion. So it's good to talk about like building a new culture. And Maroonage, I'm very, very amenable to the Maroon colonies. As a matter of fact, I personally see the Maroon struggle. I mean, we did get a revolution out of them. I see the Maroons as building proto-base areas. If you study Maoist military theory, we believe that revolution is carried out through the universal strategy of protracted people's war. Now, this isn't surrounding the cities from the countryside. It can be applied to industrial capitalist countries as well. But protracted people's war is basically you start out by conquering base areas. That's where you drive out the police, the state. And I personally see areas like, for example, in my city, there's a area in the county. It's called Kinlock. It was the first black town chartered in Missouri. And for Lambert Airport, they basically bought up this entire city and demolished all of the buildings. Like the police cars said, they don't have insurance, nothing. Like there are no city services whatsoever. You go across the river, you've got East St. Louis. Again, no city services whatsoever. They got to burn their trash because there's no trash truck. Ain't no trash truck come through there. So there are areas in the United States, and the Maroons understood this. There are areas that are isolated, that are free, relatively free from government oversight because the government don't care. For example, in the United States, a lot of people don't think that we had Maroons in the United States, but we did. They lived in the Great Dismal Swamp and northern Florida as well. So any modern day Maroons would have to organize themselves in these cities, places like Detroit, Baltimore, Gary, places that have been left behind, so to speak, by the system of neoliberalism. They used to have these giant factories there that drew our people up from down south for work. And now ain't no more work there. So what's happening? As Huey said, the people that are being lumpenized, they're being turned into what the state would call criminals because they still have to make a living. They can't go work the steel mill no more, so they slang, or they try to find a job at McDonald's, or they go around and they cut grass for $15 each every summer. But they're still making a living. That's what Marx would call the lumpen proletariat and what Sakai would call the semi-proletariat. They're half proletarian, but also they don't have to go to work in a factory every day because there ain't no factory no more. So I really, really promote Marxists upgrading our analysis, okay? Marx was good for the conditions of Europe in the 19th century. Well, they ain't in the 19th century no more. And that's what a lot of people fail to forget. I'm not going to talk about white Marxists because they don't matter. They're only 15% of the world. So when we talk about the lead up to a revolution by indigenous people, by nationally oppressed people, by New African people, Puerto Rican people, Hawaiian people, everybody that this country has enslaved within its borders, we have to talk about, like you said, Marsh, going among, as Lenin said, the lowest, deepest masses, the people that don't have shit to lose. So we talk about culture, building new people. Che Guevara talked about that as well. Like under socialism, you have a new man, I'm not trying to use gender language here, but that's literally what Che Guevara said. We have to build new people, but to get to the point where we can build new people, we have to keep in mind that we are still living in the bloodiest, most exploitative empire in the history of the world. This country that has literally bombed one of its own cities. A black mayor signed that, by the way, like W. Wilson Good in Philly. He was like, oh, fuck him. So this is what we're up against. And going back to Mao here, political power grows from the barrel of a gun. And what the formation would look like as a Maoist, I'm a firm supporter of the Vanguard Party concept. Not because, like, a lot of people don't know what the Vanguard is. And I follow Kevin Rashid Johnson on this point. A Vanguard is only accepted as such by the people. The Black Panther Party for the years roughly around 1967 to 70, before they split, with the vanguard of the black people because they actually united with what the masses of black people wanted. Their 10-point program basically condensed the hopes of every working class lumpen proletarian black person in this country into one document. I see these Marxist parties writing all of these long programs as thick as my arm here. Nobody reads that stuff because it is not relevant to the most oppressed people. It's written in this stilted language that nobody can understand. When I write, when Marsh writes, when organic black intellectuals write, we're writing for the masses of our people. Like, I can hand Walter Rodney to my almost 50-year-old mother, and she will be able to understand what he's saying. I can hand Mao to my 50-year-old mother, and she will understand what he's saying. That is how we who presume ourselves to be theoreticians have to address the people. And you'll notice when you look at FDP, STL, or any other FDP organization's propaganda, it's written in this clear language. Whereas if you look at something that's written by, I don't know, one of these Trotskyite groups that don't matter, they seem to make new groups every month. Like, it's always like, we're not in Russia in 1917. So any vanguard formation has to be realized as such by the people. Furthermore, any vanguard formation has to be accountable to the people. This is where Mao comes in. The Cultural Revolution, it wasn't just about culture. The Cultural Revolution, as it was developed in China, and you mentioned in your opening statement that the Russians failed to conduct. They didn't even conduct the Cultural Revolution. The Soviets, they were like, okay, you go do what we tell you, or you go to jail. So Mao was not like that. Mao literally initiated, and I keep saying Mao here, I mean the left wing of the Chinese Communist Party, initiated the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution by saying, bombard the headquarters, because there was a right wing within this party that was trying to drag the country back onto the road of capitalism. They were basically trying to demolish the collective farm system, basically trying to copy the Soviet Union and implementing this really, like you said, authoritarian. Now, when I talk about authoritarianism, I'm meaning about lording over and abusing the masses, exploiting their labor under socialism. A common saying among workers during the Cultural Revolution was, where are our cadres' hammers? Basically, you had, every factory had a Communist Party branch. Members of this Communist Party branch were called cadres. And the cadres in these factories, they would just sit in their offices all day while the workers were down there doing nothing. So one of the major gains of the Cultural Revolution was actually the masses forcing these detached Communist Party officials to actually get their asses out and do some work. People talk about how intellectuals will sit down to the countryside. Why did that happen? Because they sat in the cities all day. They consumed products of the peasants, but they did not know how the peasants lived. And Mao realized, the left wing within the Communist Party realized that if this was allowed to continue, they would be right back in capitalism. You would have a small ruling class exploiting the labor of damn near 1 billion people. So that is why the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution was launched. And we talk about culture because culture, in the Marxist sense, is part of the superstructure. You have your economic base down here, and all of that helps to produce the superstructure. Mao also advanced the theory that the superstructure can impact the base. Basically, politics, political lines, stuff like that. If that stuff is allowed to fester up here, it'll trickle down here. So we could take United States as an example. music, art, all of that. The United States is a bourgeois, reactionary, so-called liberal democracy. So when you turn on MTV, when you turn on BET, when you turn your radio on in your car, what do you hear? Kill, 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 money, 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 bitches, bitches, bitches. There's a reason for that. There's a reason you don't hear conscious rappers being played on mainstream radio, because they don't want that stuff being inculcated into black people's heads. They're not going to play Boots Riley and the Coup or revolutionary podcast. They don't want people listening to that stuff. They want people being money mad. They want people abusing women. They want people selling drugs, hard drugs to their own people. That's what capitalism, imperialism wants. So you have a shitty base, you have a shitty superstructure. In a socialist country, your critiques basically around authoritarianism and Marxism, basically screwing up, disrespecting the indigenous cultures of the people, that's answered by not giving, but the people will take their voice. If the Communist Party is not doing what it is supposed to do, the people have the right to rebel against and topple the people in power in that party who are disrespecting their cultural heritage. That said, like you said, Shaka Zulu had to get rid of people that were inhibiting the anti-British struggle. Like you had some of the and that's going to have to happen here too. Like a lot of these rappers, a lot of these LLC Twitter, all the LLC Twitter will be up on the wall. But like you can't allow those who have backwards, and by backwards I mean reactionary, regressive. They want to go back. They're like, oh man, I want to keep my money. You ain't gonna take away my shit. Like those types of people will have to be restricted. Otherwise, if they're allowed to spread these bad ideas under socialism or during a socialist revolution, or even worse, if we allow these people into the Communist Party, they're going to mess things up. And the same situation that's taken place in China, that's taken place in the Soviet Union, will take place in our revolution. And right now, with climate change threatening to kill us all, we really can't afford to be playing around. That's why when we talk about Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, we're talking about the lessons of the past 150 years of class struggle. And we can even expand it past that, because revolutions did not start with the Paris Commune. You had Haiti that made revolution started in 1791. Like a lot of people disrespect or disregard any rebellion or revolution that was not Marxist. The Haitians didn't need to read Marx to know that, okay, they had this small, tiny group of white folks that was beating the hell out of them every day. And they didn't have to get together and argue and struggle. They were like, okay, chop off heads, chop off heads. So that's what a lot of people don't understand. And when we talk about a synthesis, like we can synthesize. I'm a firm supporter of synthesizing all of the revolutionary experiences of colonized and oppressed people all around the world, even in Europe. Like there were oppressed and exploited peoples in Europe. That said, with the advent of colonialism, that kind of went away. But when we look at the Irish struggle, when we look at the proletarian struggle in Europe in the early 20th century, like there's stuff to learn from that. A lot of Marxists make the mistake of thinking that those are the only things that we can learn from. Again, those are mistakes. Those are dogmatist, Eurocentrist mistakes. You can't have tunnel vision and think that Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, none of which are black, I remind you, are the only revolutionaries that matter. Like I read a piece the other day that said that working class feminism doesn't exist because none of the great teachers, meaning Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, said anything about it. It's like, how dogmatic can you be? Like you've had all of the sisters in the Black Panther Party that were fucked over by these shitty men, the Combahee River Collective. You have womanism. There are so many different colonized women's feminist perspectives developed in the midst of the revolutionary struggle, and you just write it off because none of these dudes said that proletarian feminism exists. And that's why a lot of people hate communism and Maoism in particular, because we do have a tendency towards dogmatism. So basically, to wrap up, we have to have a vanguard party. This vanguard party has to be accountable to the masses. If it is not accountable to the masses, it is no vanguard party, and the masses will recognize it as such. It's just going to be another sect. And furthermore, when we talk about what the lead up to the revolution is going to look like, it's going to have to be centered around the conquest of power by armed force. Engels said that there's nothing more authoritarian than a revolution. Mao taught that revolution is the overthrow, violent overthrow of one class by another. So we always have to keep in account our class perspective. As communists, we are partisans of the proletariat. That means that we are firmly on the side of the proletariat, and our entire existence is for the realization of the proletarian conquest of power.
Thank you very much. A quick question that I wanted to, because I was going to segue into another topic, but there's a couple of things that I picked up, and I think some of the viewers picked up as well. First of all, is my voice kind of clipping in and out, or is my voice okay now? Let me. Is my voice
better now. It's much better now.
Yeah, much better.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, wait. So my voice was messed up before, and y'all didn't say nothing. Just let me embarrass myself in front of yourselves and the whole audience. Huh? Now that is some wrecker behavior. All right. So a couple of questions that came up. Chris Marsh, you were talking about your atheism and how religion has essentially been a prop or a wedge in the door to let authoritarianism in. But there's plenty of ancestral worship and spirituality that are grounded in West African faiths, and also have they've manifested themselves in the Pan-African tradition. So I guess my question is then, how do you square the already existing sort of indigenous spiritual belief with a Pan-African future, given that you're antagonistic towards religion of all kinds?
Well, I think what's important to understand is that, like I mentioned with Shaka Zulu, when superstition and even talking about scholars like Bati Shakara, he talks about the three main ills was tribalism, mysticism, and I think primitivism, right? And I think what's important to understand, right? Spirituality, and I was listening to Dr. Malefi Asante and Dr. Wade Nobles. Spirituality is a very relative term to where it can mean creativity, it can mean energy and force. So it's a very fluid term. But I think when things get concretized into things that can become oppressive, then it's something that naturally our people, will, kind of resist against, right? But I don't really advocate toward like an atheist Africa so much. I really advocate more toward everybody shifting to some kind of African spiritual system. And my thing is, if we have an issue with one of the systems, we can adapt it. Because I know we're supposed to honor, tradition, but we don't necessarily have to just keep everything in place. I think Fanon, he said, what's the quote where he talks about every generation has to make its marker. Hold up. I can go see when you're a researcher. Hold up, because I'm gonna go right to it. It was like each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it. Mm-hmm. So part of our job is like, if something isn't working, we can genuinely change it. My thing is that saying something is tradition. Slavery is tradition. Capitalism is tradition. They're torturing children is that's tradition. So I'm saying that we need to be creators of our culture. We need to create the solutions that we want to see. So for me, even going back into kind of the whole maroon thing, I'm thinking more of it on a conceptual base and not a literal one, to where our decentralized organization is more fluid, so we can form around like more of the conditions than just solely defining, being a maroon, being in those isolated areas. Because I think intellectually it offers a lot of flexibility that we can really act on. Because one of the things I noticed with the Mbunji, right, when the colonial agents, like when the missionaries came, it was nothing for them, to go underground. And it made me think about the Black Liberation Army. And what I was thinking was, one of the issues with the Panther split with the Panther 21 and the West Coast Panthers in Eldridge Cleaver was the cultural disconnect, to where, as y'all know, you got a bunch of Shakurs, you got Sekou Odinga, you got Setawayo, and when you link these names up to African history, of course, there's plenty of revolutionaries. So what I'm saying is, one thing we could offer is, for example, like in Foucault's, what is it? What's the name? African cosmology of the Bantu Congo, right? He talks about something in terms of tying knots, which are codes, right? And when we think about being in like a oppressed situation, we can develop, if not just a language, which Shekant Joe talks about, but more of codes that we understand when we're attacked and when we're under severe repression. We can creatively come up with concepts that we understand, so we can organize and be able to get out of certain situations, so that when they destroy certain things, we're not solely dependent on a physical manifestation, even a piece of paper. So the thing I got from the Mbanji was that it was part of the oral tradition, where a lot of the stuff had to become a part of your culture. So when I talk about even a synthesis of the politics, the economics, the family structure, because even speaking to the people's needs, right? I think a big thing is really shifting from a nuclear family to an extended family structure, right? Because what will happen even with that minor adjustment, we could solve single mothers, because it's like single mothers is like, in terms of morality, I think that's all bullshit, right? But I think what's really the tragedy is that it shouldn't be two people trying to raise all their kids. Part of the reason why I introduced Kendezi was so that people could have time to really contribute to their community. And then not only will the older people babysit, but the younger people babysit, so it frees people up. And then that extended family structure, it frees people up, time-wise, so that we can all develop. And then it really goes hand in hand into, like Ubuntu, or, Simba Simbi, which means hold up that which holds you up. So a lot of the concepts that would gel what people call, communalism, Ubuntu, or even Asusu, it's just extremely important that, even going all the way back to the religious tip, I think that we have to start to cultivate our own social institutions, whether they be spiritual or religious. It can't be concrete. So my thing would be that, like, even Foucault, right? There was a podcast by, the Amaral Squad, talking about the gods of atheism, right? And they I think Foucault defined God as existence, right? So for me as an atheist, that ain't nothing to adjust to, right? So a lot of the spiritual stuff that we get in African culture, it's conceptual. It's metaphoric. That we didn't really believe in actual humans. We believed in ideas and concepts. So my Pan-African concession would be to get people to go from Abrahamic religion to African religion. And I'm cool with that, because, as an African, if it's not working, we could say, okay, look, this ain't working. We've been doing it for 5 years, and let's do some new shit. So that's kind of my position. And I think even in an African context, there's room for disbelief. There's room for debate.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And Black Red Guard, a question that came up in the chat, and actually it was a question that I was planning on asking you myself, is how do you, in the course of the development of revolutionary culture, how do you then prevent splits, internal divisions, schisms, etc.? And this isn't even necessarily specific to socialism. You saw this in the Haitian Revolution. That is, the camp that came down on the side of Toussaint Louverture versus Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and also in Ghana. How do you prevent those internal schisms?
Yeah. Mao always said, this Marxism, don't practice revisionism, unite, don't split. And what he meant by this was that the party has to be rooted in the people, because a lot of this stuff, I've been through several political splits in my life. People don't like me. That's okay. But seriously though, when
I'll interrupt just to say we like you. Oh. And so does the chat. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. But like, a lot of this stuff is like bourgeois nonsense. Like the leadership of most communist parties and most revolutionary formations in general tend to be drawn from the ranks of the petty bourgeoisie, whether it's in Africa, Europe, Asia, what have you. Why is that? Because Lenin said that the proletariat by itself can only develop trade union consciousness. That means that, okay, without revolutionaries going among them, agitating among them and organizing them all, they can be like, okay, we want $5 raise. We want better conditions. And that's good, but that's not in and of itself revolutionary. And there's a lot of communists that believe that got to do is help workers organize for wage increases. In an imperialist country and in any country that sets itself up for what we call economism. And economism is a form of right opportunism. And in imperialist countries, it leads itself to social chauvinism. Anyways, so when we avoiding splits, communists use a method called democratic centralism. Now, in the United States, a lot of the parties have basically twisted it into a cult, meaning do whatever leadership says or you get expelled. Okay, real democratic centralism as practiced by every communist party is basically, Malcolm X actually defined it in an African term, in an African methodology. When we talk about, like he said, if you have disagreements, you don't go out in the street and act a fool in the street. You go in, get in the closet, and argue amongst yourselves, and you present a united front in public. Malcolm X was describing democratic centralism there. If you all are members, if we are members of the same party, say you, me, and Marsh get together and form a party, okay? Under democratic centralism, if this was a private jitsi chat, we would struggle out. Okay, what should be our line on what is going on in Haiti right now? Or what's going on with Macky Sall in Senegal? When we talk about that and we work out our line through debate and struggle, that's the democracy part. And then when we agree on and vote on a line, say me and Marsh agree on a line, we both raise our hands, that's our line because the majority dominates. So Q may disagree, but Q can't disagree in public. He could disagree in the next meeting saying, see, we tried to organize a protest around us and didn't nobody come. So that's a sign that the line ain't right, because if the line was right, then people would be coming. So democratic centralism, if the people involved are principled. Now, if you've got an unprincipled person, there's going to be splits. That's why you expel people like that. And like you can usually tell an unprincipled person by how they move. Oh, you went to a meeting with at the U.S. Embassy. What the hell are you doing there? And you didn't tell nobody. Like that's a sign of an unprincipled person. Principled communist always is open and above board, as Mao said. That means that if you disagree, say you disagree. Don't form some secret clique to try to split the party or get the no. And I really like Rashid because he critiqued the fact that the original Black Panther Party didn't really practice democratic centralism. It's basically formed around Huey's personality. And a lot of they had a structure. Bobby Seale was chairman. Lil Bobby Hutton was our treasurer. And you had all of these different things. But in terms of practice, what Huey said goes. And you also had like physical discipline of cadre. Like if you said something that Huey didn't like, he would literally have you put in a hole and start kicking and beating on you. That's not how principled communist parties work. And that's not how democratic centralism works. And in terms of the split within the ranks of the Black Panther Party, you had two ginormous egos. You had Huey P. Newton and you had Eldridge Cleaver, who, in my personal opinion, shouldn't have been admitted to the party in the first place. But so when you have ego, liberalism, I believe one of the moderators suggested that comrades read Combat Liberalism, and I recommend that everybody read that. Not just because I'm a Maoist, like you do not have to be a Maoist to understand what Mao is saying there. Liberalism in the revolutionary collective, it's something that's corrosive. And when you're working with other people, like I always encourage people to think about, like, if you are actually in a revolution where you're getting shot at, all this petty shit don't matter. Like, okay, he said something mean to you, or she didn't respond to your DM in time. Who cares? Like, we've literally got people starving to death. We have people that don't have no place to go tonight. They're sleeping outside in the cold. Africa is being bombed. Latin America is being looted. There's all sorts of contradictions and problems, and the communists and the revolutionaries, the so-called revolutionaries, are too busy squabbling and quibbling with each other. That is why people are not joining communist formations, because nobody has time to get off a 12-hour shift to come debate over why Chris Marshall is not good. Like, who cares? If what the brother is saying is right, he's right. If what he's saying is wrong, it's wrong. So we have to develop a culture of principled relations to people. That's how we can avoid splits. Like, I disagree with my comrades that I organize with all the time, but we haven't split because we realize that preserving the integrity of our revolutionary organization is more important than any personal quarrel or beef. And we can always do a mediation process to struggle against bad tendencies. There's no need, okay, fuck you, I'm splitting. Like, if your organization gets to the point where people are splitting off and leaving, like, that's a sign that you haven't built it correctly. You're not relying on the masses, and comrades feel that their relationship with the organization is so antagonistic. Like, a split is an antagonistic thing. And they feel that their relationship with this organization that they've given their time and energy and sweat into is so antagonistic that they just want to leave it. So splits come from incorrect handling of liberalism, disrespect of rank and file cadre, lack of being rooted in the masses, and petty bourgeois class orientation and behavior, essentially.
Thank you very much. Now, we're going to get a little bit more head to head, I just want to, sorry, go ahead.
Can I respond? So just because we just covered where Huey Newton was like, and I'm looking for it, but I believe it is on the relevance of the church it's in To Die for the People. Huey was saying that he even got outvoted in some cases, right? And that he would fall out with even, a David Hilliard. So I used to have the same position where Huey was just authoritarian, and I know there's a lot of documentaries out there that also say that. But Huey even considered leaving his own organization because of him disagreeing with the Central Committee. So I'm even understanding, like, as I study, the Panthers and stuff, it was very complex because he was saying that there wasn't necessarily a split. And I think one thing we had to take into account was that Huey was in prison for a lot of the time, and then there was so many things going on. So I think even in the name of like synthesis, we really kind of got to see everybody's like perspective, because I would think Huey was just outright just running everything and everybody was just bending at his will. But in a lot of ways, like, even Huey talked about in his dissertation where there was a lot of, successful chapters that kind of were, just autonomous. But I think there may even have been an issue where sometimes maybe David and Huey would agree, but then sometimes David would disagree with Huey and then be with, the other members. So I like, until last week, I didn't even realize, like, Huey was like, I was outvoted and I thought about leaving, the party, but I decided to just stick with him. And it just even goes to the point, that a Black Red Guard was even saying. So I'm like the Panther history is very complex. But yeah, let's get to the next one.
For sure. I just wanted to go a little bit more head to head with your points of view and see if we can, get you to respond to one another and get either closer to an understanding of each other's points of view or educating the viewers, or both. So my question, what this really is going to come down to is whether you believe Pan-Africanism and socialism are mutually compatible. And if so, why not? In the past, Chris Marsh, you said that you believe that socialism is a European system of governance. Black Red Guard, you have spoken about some of the shortcomings of Pan-African revolutionary structure. So in what sense are these senses of social organization compatible or incompatible, and why? We'll start with Chris Marsh.
So part of, the shift that I want us to make is simply that instead of even operating more off an Nkrumah's point of view, I'm thinking more of a Sheikh Anta Diop or, Diopian kind of approach, in that we work off the barriers, or I guess the land barriers that the ancient, kingdoms, just work off the barriers that they created. Because I think when we organize around what the ethnic groups, the clans, the family institutions kind of organize, I think it's much easier to go from that basis and then unify smaller regions. And then you would even like for example, the thing that I would present is developing, Mbanjis everywhere, so that on a smaller level, we would start to create organic bonds. Now, the thing where I would come at it with is that I'm not looking so much for this rigid unity, but more a consensus, to where even if we have a different lifestyle, now I'm not even saying not on no capitalist socialist, but just difference of a governmental, just structure. I think we don't always have to get other groups to kind of become like uniform, but just agree to be able to band together when necessary. You know what I'm saying? So I think European culture, right? It just prevents them from achieving socialism, achieving communism, right? So in order to gel these concepts, right, and in order to make it make sense, there's a lot of people, they have to dismantle and destroy that European approach, because it creates all these dichotomies that can't really, be reconciled. So what I would say is that we more so operate off of what Foucault calls a spiral, economy, which, for lack of a better word, would look like communalism, or would look like what we call socialism. But it's a more detailed system that recognizes the person. So where we would diverge is where we identify as labor power, as commodity, and more so identifying as a human being, to the point where like an occupation is more so about the value of that occupation to the community, and not just you selling, labor power and working towards seizing the means of production, but really getting into, I do this because I was cultivated from childhood to do this. I went through several age grade sets to get to the end, and then I'm working toward getting to the council of elders. So my thing is really, the framework that I'm saying socialism operate under, I think that we should abandon, and I think we need to operate off of the indigenous like systems and then modernize them. Because even Foucault said that the spiral economy eventually would kind of need some modernization, because it would get stagnant. So I think a lot of the solutions that we want to see, we still have to create.
Thank you very much. And Black Red Guard, did you have any response to that?
Yeah. I believe Nkrumah wrote about like how they were good in these early African societies. Like, and we also have to keep in mind, I believe Marsh already knows this as he studied the motherland, but like there was a variety of different organizational types of African societies. For example, if you go around Namibia, you still have hunter-gatherer societies, the Khoi people. Egypt, that was literally a slave society. A lot of the empires in West Africa, they were empires, so they were slave societies. And some parts of the Congo, you had the white folks call them pygmies, but I believe their right name is Mbuti. They have a sort of communal hunter-gatherer lifestyle as well. But I'm a firm believer, Mao was as well. Like Mao's military theory was basically Sun Tzu with a bit of Lenin thrown in. So I'm a firm believer in taking the good and throwing out the bad, because like we said at the beginning, a lot of these societies were patriarchal, and they were slave societies. They were torturing children or selling people to the European, all sorts of bad things. So at the same time, as a historical materialist, I have to realize that that era is past. We live in a period of monopoly capital, as Nkrumah said, neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. And while it may be good to return to this type of organizing, and my comrade mentioned in the chat this is how indigenous societies are organized. We still have to come to terms, and everybody here knows this, with the fact that we are going up against some of the bloodiest, most well-organized, most well-armed groups in history. And when we talk about like what the revolution is going to look like, or what are we going to do post-revolution, I'm more concerned about like what types of forms are we going to have to organize to get there. And all of these nice cultural changes that I, for one, support. I'd love to have a council of elders to consult. I'd love to have to, instead of like wasting 8 years in college, getting in debt and all of that, racking my brains to learn stuff that I'll never use, I'd love to have to just go through practical based age grade training, or have my descendants go through this. Basically, okay, you want to be a fighter? Okay, you practice for 16, 17, 18 years, and then you can call yourself a fighter. You don't read books about fighting, you practice. But if these things are to be relevant, like, they have to be synthesized with the fact that that we live in an era of global imperialism. And if somebody can push a button in Las Vegas and destroy a whole country in 15 minutes, like, how do we combat that? And that's why I'm a firm partisan of the not just the vanguard structure, but of rooting ourselves in the masses, of making use of all of the theoretical tools available to us. What does Marxism do for us? Okay, it gives us an analysis of capitalism, because it was developed by somebody. Okay, Engels owned a factory. Marx was pretty well off too. So you have these two dudes that knew in and out how capitalism worked. Marx and Engels couldn't have written on any African society because they did not live in Africa. But they could have written, and they did write, on European capitalism, how it's screwing over the world, because they lived in Europe when capitalism was just coming about. Lenin could write on imperialism because he lived in Russia, which was an imperialist country, and he traveled greatly, and he was in contact with people in Britain, France, Germany, all these imperialist countries. So a lot of people make the mistake and think that, oh, you slave to white folks, or you just want to follow them. No, Marx was racist as hell. Like, I will be the first to admit that. Like, we have to separate the theories that these people developed from the individuals. And when we talk about, Marsh said something about developing and recognizing the individual, and socialism, and going even further, in communism, that's when the true possibilities of ourselves as individuals is realized. Because right now, we're collectively exploited. You go to work, you spend your time with 25, 30 other miserable motherfuckers, and you go home. You have no time for nothing. Then you get up and do the same thing again. So if we're going to talk about developing the individual, we have to talk about eradicating the exploitation of labor as a collective. Of course, it'd be nice to abolish all of these forms of exploitation and all of these material relations, but that ultimately requires abolishing capitalism, because we can talk about abolition. Like people talk about abolishing the police. People have been talking about abolishing the police for ages, for decades. Yet the police still here, and they get more and more money, and they get more and more toys to knock us over the head with. So if we're going to make any of these things actionable, we have to realize, as George Jackson said, that fascism is already here. Fascism is already here. And if we're going to destroy centralized fascism, now keep in mind, a lot of people call me a revisionist for saying this, but I do believe that even though we have a centralized vanguard party that is recognized as such by the masses, a lot of the more archaic forms, the Maroons, because like Marshall said, Africans are masters of decentralized organization. Like the reason why none of these left groups get a lot of black people is because that shit is foreign to us. Like we don't okay, so you got 3 people, that's the central committee up here, and they tell us down here what to do. Like how that work? I never met this person. All they do is write things to me and tell me what to do. Okay, ain't none of this shit gonna work in my neighborhood. You say put a community guard here. We got a grocery store up the street. What the hell we need a community guard for? Like, that's why when we talk about the dialectic between centralization and decentralization, say that any centralization has to be founded on a basis of decentralization, of decentralized organizations that are still centralized at the local level, but meaning that, okay, somebody up here that's never been to your city can't tell you what to do. That's never done any SICA. We call it social investigation and class analysis. Basically, you go in, if you're going to start organizing in a neighborhood, you have to go knock doors, talk to people. Like whenever people ask me, like, how do you form an FTP? Like, first of all, why do you want to form an FTP? Why do you want to form an organization? Do you know anybody in these neighborhoods? Who do you organize with? Who is the biggest employer in your city? What are the police doing? Do you even know who your alderman is? Like people that don't know anything about any of this stuff, and they're still trying to organize it. So to actually build a concrete organization that could topple this system and make all of these things actionable that we're talking about, it actually requires people at the grassroots in a centralized but decentralized fashion, conducting social investigation and class analysis and organizing people around real problems, real issues that are actually harming and impacting people in the communities. Oh, that was a tangent.
But it was a good one. We learned quite a bit from that, and the chat seemed to have as well. I'm going to ask you a question, Chris, Black Red Guard. Actually, it's sort of a 2-part question. What parts of socialism and communism are the most beneficial to the aim of a revolutionary Pan-Africanism, and what parts of it are the least beneficial? And Chris, I'm going to let you follow up to Black Red Guard, or Chris Marsh, I'm going to let you follow up to Black Red Guard's response.
Sure. I'd say that the most beneficial part is the political economy. When we talk about like how everybody knows that Africa and black people are exploited. Okay, everybody knows that we're being fucked over. But what Marxism and socialism offers, what Marxism, Leninism, Maoism offers, is a concrete and thorough exposition of why exactly we're exploited, and we can supplement this with non-Marxist theoreticians, because not everybody that's revolutionary has been a Marxist. Okay, like Du Bois wasn't a Marxist when he wrote Black Reconstruction. Yet, if you cannot understand the historical position of black people in the United States, if you have not read Black Reconstruction, so we can supplement, and this is what I constantly try to tell Marxists, and they call it eclecticism. Okay, when we say eclecticism, we basically mean picking stuff from all sorts of places, but that is literally what all of our theoreticians have done. Like Marx took both Feuerbach and Hegel and developed Marxism, and Lenin synthesized a whole bunch of people. So people criticize about eclecticism, but the Black Panther Party itself was eclectic. Like everybody wants to ascribe a tradition. Oh, they were Maoists, they were Marxist-Leninists, they were anarchists. No, they had a Juche phase. They sold Little Red. They didn't even, as a matter of fact, if I recall correctly, they sold the Little Red Book because they knew that all them white kids at Berkeley would buy it. Then they were like, somebody cracked it up and was like, there's some good shit in here. Let's read this. So they were influenced by Mao Zedong thought. They were, I believe George Jackson makes a reference to being influenced by Trotsky. Like, they were a very, very eclectic group. And anybody that is it's actually involved in the process of making revolution has to synthesize their overarching ideology, in my case would be Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, with the revolutionary tradition of their own people. Mao was a master of this. When you read him, you realize that he basically took a bunch of ancient Chinese military theory and sayings and maxims and ways of throwing things. Like, a lot of people don't realize Mao and Stalin didn't get along. Like, Mao and Stalin couldn't stand each other. Of course, Mao was principled, and he didn't want to split the international communist movement, but he realized that Stalin, if he was a dogmatist and did everything that Stalin wanted him to do, he would have had his head on a spike. So it's a matter of taking what is good and throwing out what is bad. In terms of our experience as Pan-African revolutionaries, the economic aspect and the military aspect, like when we talk about how exactly we're going to liberate Africa, the theory of protracted people's war is really good. And when we're talking about how we're going to break apart the United States, the theory of protracted people's war is even better. Okay, it's basically how small, poorly armed groups can defeat large, well-armed imperialist forces. How is this done? Ultimately, by relying on the masses. And a lot of people, like, the reason that the brothers and sisters in the 60s and 70s failed was because they adhered to Che Guevara's Focoismo. Like, you had, okay, small, tiny groups that can go and kill a police here, burn up a cop car there. Okay, you could do that all for 50 years. At the end of the day, they're just going to hire new cops and buy new cop cars. They have huge budgets. So that's why the armed struggle experiments of the 70s failed, because they were not rooted in the people. Protracted people's war military theory teaches us that without the people, the people's army has nothing. Without the people, we are nothing. That is why we have to represent. We have to represent the will of the people. That's what a lot of people don't understand. Being the vanguard means not just standing at the front. It means pulling from the front, organizing and working with the people. Otherwise, if you fail to represent the people's interests, they're not going to follow you. They're not going to join your party. They're not going to be involved in any of your little front groups, and they're not going to read your stuff, because why should they? There's many other things that they could be doing. They could be going to the church and the mosque or whatever. Least beneficial. A lot of aspects of Marxism, like a lot of people, they read Marxist footnotes and they take my main critique of Marxism as it exists today is its dogmatism. Like, these weren't prophets. These were imperfect, very imperfect human beings. They made mistakes. For example, Lenin thought that there was going to be a revolution in Germany. There never was any revolution in Germany. The German Revolution got smashed and they fell to the Nazis. So we have to realize that there is no master plan or book how to write a revolution, even though I did release a book jokingly titled How to Make Revolution and Influence People. But seriously, though, there is no master guiding plan for revolution. Revolution is built by thousands of people that are working the same towards the same goal and organizing each other. Oh, why are the little squares changing? Okay.
Sorry about that. My fault. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So the most useless part of Marxism today is dogmatism. And again, a lot of that is the product of white Marxists and parties that they're allowed to lead, and that is why you should not allow white Marxists to lead parties. Because, like I said, they're ultimately they're only 15% of the world. Like, why are you letting 15% of the world, a minority of which is proletarian, dictate a revolutionary scheme to 77% of the world? That ain't gonna work. So And a lot of white people hate me for that, but a lot of white people hate me because of this. So whatever.
All right. And Chris, did you have any response to that?
Yeah, so I want to be perfectly clear, right? African people do have ways of interpreting, phenomena. A lot of it is represented, in African cosmology. Things like hermopolitan cosmology, hermeneutics. There's a lot of ways of interpreting, just nature, right? One of the things that I want to be perfectly clear about is that when I talk about this institution, I think the format is something that is extremely useful, because I think a huge issue that we're having in terms of organizations, we don't have that many competent Black organizations with younger Black competent, leaders, right? Because everything is rushed. Everything is read this paragraph, jump up, and then go lead the people, right? But Black people never have time to ever develop. So obviously, the Kendesi would be something that would be for posterity, most definitely, right? But the Mbonji, I think one of the good aspects of it, right, is something. Let me go to it. It's something that is it's called Kinzanzi, and it's Mfundu, right? And basically it's political dialectic debates, politics, dialectical like commission sessions of debates, right? Basically that would factor in with groundings with my brothers, right? So often Black people in communist organizations, I feel like, are really silenced, right? And creating something, like an Mbonji could really give Black people a whole lot of agency. And I think we really need confidence in ourselves to really build organization, because too often there's so much alienation between the organization and the people. So I think what the Mbonji does, it neutralizes the vanguard, because instead of having a vanguard, the people, will develop their own leadership. And I think we see that with people even like an Ella Baker, right? See, part of the reason why the Black Panther Party could exist was that they had SNCC, they had they had they had SCLC, they had NAACP, they had a organizational foundation, which we don't have anymore. So part of what the Omni African is doing is making sure that, if anything else, we're helping lay a foundation so that a lot of the younger folks don't have to keep making the same mistakes. And I think the reason why this conversation is so important is so that we can really start to link people, because I know Black Red Guard is hated. I'm extremely hated because of my positions on religion, and even a lot of the Black leftists and Black communists things. And I know we both disagree with hood communists, and I know there's a whole situation with Black Power Media where it's some heavy issues. But I say all that to say that a lot of the younger people need to be a part of the process of developing these organizations, because we got to remember the Panthers were 19, 21, 25. But the reason they were able to go back, the reason they were so competent and so smart, was you had Ella Baker, you had James Foreman, you had who else? You had the Black Southerners, who H. Rap Brown talks about, and he talks about in Die Nigger Die, right? There was a much stronger cultural foundation, right? And the culture is supposed to merge the politics. It's supposed to make sense of the economics. So because even so, the Mbonji concept even explains why we still operate our political agenda out of the church, because of things like the Mbonji. For example, when the missionaries came, they put the Jesus thing inside the Mbonji. So there's a connection there. Even the reason why they call it like the community center is because, like the Mbonji, it's in the center, right? That's also where the think tank is. So it's something that can both be centralized and decentralized. It can be something that our people can develop and create, and there's a lot of flexibility there. But I just want to make it clear that it's not about African romanticism and using something in the same exact time under the same conditions, but it's more so about the organizational format, because a lot of organizational structures are old. Capitalism is old, socialism is old. So it's more about the structure. It's not about recreating something exactly how it was. But what I'm recognizing, like even going back into the Kendesi, right? The extended family structure would help a lot of people be able to get more time to contribute to the community. That's a really big problem because a lot of Black women are working themselves to death. A lot of Black men are working themselves to death. But if we had a family structure that was organized around people's work schedules to where we could relieve some of that responsibility, then that can change people's lives immediately, right? If we had a political structure to where we could figure out family issues, because my thing is, we start with the family, we start with the block, we start with the neighborhood, and then we keep going, But I think one thing that our people need to know is that we can create our own institutions that we've had for a very long time, and it's not something that just only works in agricultural, hunter-gatherer societies, but it's something that is extremely familiar because a lot of these systems have existed long before we even knew. I mean, long before like a Europe existed. So all I'm saying is that as we reintroduce these systems, as we talk about concepts like Simba, like Ubuntu, right? They all work with, cooperative economics so that the everyday people, they could get something like hold up that which holds you up, right? In terms of sharing with people. And then as we're able to merge, like these concepts, then it'll be easier to understand because a lot of our people, we respond to symbols, to analogies, to metaphors, right? So, my thing is just being able to have an African-centered, revolutionary foundation that can not only combat capitalism, but my thing is working toward at least dismantling it to the point to where, of course, it has to destroy capitalism, but also it has to destroy the power of that system so that we're not as vulnerable to it. Because right now, it's not enough just to destroy. It's not enough just to destroy capitalism, but we gotta destroy the power that their culture has on African people. So we gotta really have confidence in knowing that we could build something that has nothing to do with white people. And then when we have solidarity, it can be much more practical. Because okay, so look, I got a Fred Hampton hoodie on, right? Shout out to Fred Hampton, right? I argue that Fred Hampton was able to organize people around their practical interests, right? I think the hillbillies hated him, right? But so what? He was organized. He could have organized to the point where they saw that he was serving their self-interest. And then he was able to organize around that. Same thing with the gangs, with the lumpen, right? The lumpen was able to see, damn, like he got a program, because even Huey Newton talked about it. He said Fred Hampton was able to build I want to say it was like 3 breakfast programs in Chicago and 2 really successful, health centers, right? And we haven't seen anything like that since then. So one of the things I want to stress is that before you can get a rainbow coalition, you got to build up a Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party, which was all Black. So my thing is going back to remembering that the NAACP and SNCC and SCLC was able to lay the foundation, even though we do disagree with them, ideologically, but making sure that they were able to even create an environment to where a Black Panther Party and a revolutionary action movement and Black Liberation Army could exist. But I think right now, what the makeshift age grade set in Bonji is really to get our political prisoners to teach people like me and Black Red Guard to avoid a lot of these mistakes, because there are a lot of elders that could help us organize to make this process much more efficient. So the makeshift, like in Bonji, we don't have to wait 20 years to develop it, but you could get a Daruba Ben Wahad, a Sekou Odinga, get, like Jalil Montekim, and then have them talk to us. So even when we're organizing how we're going to resist, we have so many different options because we have the wisdom of people who already got those victories. So that's all I'm saying. Like, a lot of this stuff, it doesn't have to be recreating something in terms of this African romantic thing, but more so being able to utilize all that we have, because I feel that we only really scratch the surface in terms of the structures that exist in African culture that could be applied to the struggle. So that's what I mean by applying concepts like a Kendesi, applying concepts, like the she liked the Mbanji, and even getting into why was Haiti so successful, going back to the Akan people who had a ton of military victories in Africa and was able to carry over that success to Haiti. So I think part of African cultural retentions is not the whole we were, royalty, but we had victories that we could tap back into and we can apply to our everyday struggles. So that's why I'm saying that the African culture that we hear about, a lot of it is just the chitlins, as I would say. But we don't get into a lot of the good shit. We just dismiss a lot of the stuff that worked, where people were building shit and overthrowing and defeating the French, the British, all that. We really dismiss all of that. And I think it's time that we begin to tap back into it and apply it now, and then modernize it, of course.
Okay. And that actually brings me to my next question, which is, and I'll ask this one to Black Red Guard first. How would you go about organizing between diasporic African and continental African communities? Because that seems to be one of the largest schisms right now, regardless of whatever tendency you subscribe to. It seems as though the urgency of Pan-African organizing has gradually dissolved over the course of a century.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't understand. Like, you always have to look. I'm going to keep saying this, and y'all will get tired of me saying it, but it's always class, class, class. A lot of the African immigrants that I hate this term, African Americans, or Africans in America. Same thing. Back in the 30s and the 40s, it was the West Indians. Like, there were quarrels and contradictions between the West Indians and the American diasporic Africans. And a lot of this was police siren, helicopter, hello. A lot of this was it's class. A lot of these West Indian immigrants were store owners. A lot of these Nigerians, Ghanans, Ethiopians, South Africans, what have you, are bourgeois. They come here. A lot of them already have money when they come here. They go to university and they get these professional jobs. And they, I've heard it, like, oh, y'all lazy. Y'all steady talking about slavery, this and that. Like, it's a disconnect and ignorance on both sides. And from the West African diasporas that I've talked to, like, a lot of the stuff in that community, because we as American diasporic Africans, we believe that, oh, they stuck up, they don't like us, or they sold us, stupid stuff like that. And on the American side, you have idiots like adults that are like, oh, fuck these Africans, fuck these Jamaicans, Barbadians, Dominicans, all that. We're a mess. So you have these people that are getting into this whole I'm black, but I loves America type thing. So there's ignorance on both sides. But when we take class as the key root, you'll start to understand that the majority of the people on the continent are poor, working class people. The majority of the people in America are poor, working class people. And the majority of the people in the Caribbean and Latin America who are African are poor, working class people. So that's our basis of unity, along with the fact that we are also all oppressed as Africans. Anti-blackness is global. You go to China, they call us Hayren or Hayway, Black Ghost, and a whole bunch of other ridiculous things. You go to Europe, they fuck with us. You come here, they fuck with us. So anti-blackness is something, combating anti-blackness is something that we can get behind, whether you're a diaspora Nigerian living in Hong Kong, or whether you're whether you're a young brother in the hood in Baltimore. I'm gonna shoot down this fucking helicopter. No, I'm not. But I hate those things.
In a video game. In a video game.
I figured. See, I figured I'd got used to these things. I live right by a hospital. Anyways, so we can unite on the basis of being working class, being doubly exploited, or as Lenin would say, super exploited. We are exploited as workers, and we are exploited as an oppressed nationality. And that's why I'm really, really critical, hypercritical of this whole LLC Twitter, black capitalism thing. Like, they ain't gonna let you be rich, bruh. My grandmother, when I was growing up, my grandmother came straight up here from Mississippi. She always used to tell me, like, these white folks is not gonna let you get as much money as they are. Why? They might let one or two, just as an example to the rest of us. Oh, you can do this, work yourself to death, and you could be like Oprah. But in terms of whole neighborhoods of black folks being multi-million, hell no. Because who are they going to exploit? Who are they going to lock up? Like, so we always have to take class as the key link. And I think, along with our collective struggle against anti-blackness and building unity around the continued exploitation, war making, and destruction of the continent that we all come from, which is Africa. Like, a lot of people don't realize, like, a lot of black folks that are born and raised over here do not know that Africa, the reason that all of these people, China, Japan, Europe, Brazil, the United States, all of these imperialist countries are probing and picking around in Africa right now, is because Africa is the richest continent on earth, and it's ours. It's ours. We're from there. If you don't want nothing to do with Africa, the white folks and the Chinese and the Japanese sure do. And if we aren't careful, if we don't build concrete, principled Pan-African unity on a socialist basis to run all these folks off our continent and take our shit back, then these people are eating up our birthright. That is where, regardless of whether you're a Jamaican or an American or you were born in Germany or whatever, if you black, you have some roots. You have a stake in what happens to Africa. I'm not a Marcus Garvey back to Africa type, although sometimes messing with white folks, it is real tempting. But, like, there's enough room over there for all of us, okay? Like, we talk about the Amazon, like, the Congo, the Nile, like, we have so many of the largest rivers in the world. All of that stuff makes fertile land. That's why they're over there cutting down the trees. You have these little 6-year-old black kids in the Congo being forced to dig up the shit that goes in your cell phone and your laptop. Like, Africa is rich. And not just because of the material aspect, but because of the human aspect. Africa has, I believe, 14.7%. No, 22. It's a hell of a large amount just on one continent, and it's growing. The reason that Europeans are so tight is because their birth rate is declining. So they realize that, okay, black folks is going to take over the world along with Asians just by numbers alone. That's not saying that there's a real firm basis just because we're both not white with people in Asia, because there's a whole set of contradictions there. But if we don't develop a Pan-African revolutionary movement on a principled basis with military force, humanity is going to be destroyed. Like, these people, these exploiters, these neo-colonialists, they don't care about what happens to the majority of the world's people. They're already trying to pick and probe around up on Mars. They're already putting together their escape plan. So if we don't get our shit together, generally, then we're going to be fucked. So we have to be Pan-Africans out of necessity. And that means putting aside all of these petty quarrels, most of which were rigged up by colonizers in the first place. Again, like, oh, you light skin, I'm dark skin, or you speak why you speak an African language, or why are you this? Why do you follow this colonizer religion as opposed to this colonizer religion, or why you do your hair that way? Like, none of this shit matters. One thing that I give the Europeans and all of these other imperialists, like, they are focused on shit that matters. Land, resources. That's what all that other bullshit, no. And we have to be like that. We have to, okay. Malcolm X said that any revolution revolves around land. Marx said that the root of all wealth is the land and the people. So that's what we have to start talking about. Any black theoretician, whatever, of any tendency has to deal with the question of land and people and resources in Africa. That's what I say on that.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Just a second for me to get myself off of mute. Chris, did you have any responses to that?
Yeah. So I think,
and sorry, in your response, also want to find out from you, what would be your central organizing principle around diasporic Africans and continental Africans?
So I think where I would start, and I think I would start with organizing people regionally, right? And what I mean by that is that, well, a lot of us come from certain places in Africa, right? And I think when we see certain cultural, type retentions in our people throughout the diaspora, that can be a basis, for operational, like, unity. So I think, the material, like, point of view on just land resources and just the opposition is cool, but I think it has to be more than that. I think part of it is that we have to see one another as part of a larger, like, African culture, right? Because I think too often we think that we're so diverse that no one can identify, with one another. And I think Sheikh Anta Diop, his Federated States book, or it's a Black Africa book, it really does a good job of seeing how a lot of the African people, like, identify, because as we said, like, Nigeria, that is a catastrophe because of the colonizer. So one of the things we got to figure out is what our similarities are, culturally. And then as we see each other as the same people or as similar people, I think it'll be a lot easier, to organize around that basis, because so often it's just like, there's so many African cultural, like, retentions that we do subconsciously that we don't even realize. Not only in terms of like familial organization and rituals, but also politically. When you look at a lot of the African, like, warrior traditions in Angola, and look at the link to that with the Panthers in Louisiana, then link that to the people in Haiti. So there's a lot of culture there that we can organize around. And when I say culture, I don't mean just like very superficial things, but ideological things that people can start to identify with different groups. Because as we study more, even the way that a lot of the neo-colonial, like, puppets, if you read Dwayne Omawali's work, a lot of these dictators who are kept in place by the West, it's the same thing. Like, one thing I noticed between Nkrumah, Nairi, and Sekou Touré was that they all disbanded, the indigenous markets, right? Now, of course, there's always going to be some issues that African people got to work out with our various systems. But I think one thing that we have to respect and just acknowledge is that our people already have existing cultures that we have to organize around. Now, where there's where there's like all types of exploitation and stuff, or because see, another thing I peep, right, a lot of the things that the neo-colonists will do, right, they'll buy off a chief, right, and then they'll try to act like that's African culture, but it's not. Even Cabral talked about how he couldn't even use a Marxist reference because he had to figure out how to organize the Balanta and Fulani people. And I think it was the Balanta was vertical organization and the Fulani was horizontal. I could be mixing those up in terms, but it was two groups that had different structures. But he figured out a way to organize them and get them to fight off the Portuguese, to the extent the United States had to intervene, like they did with Frelimo, like they did with Vietnam, and I'm talking about when France was in Vietnam. So I think a big thing is starting to recognize each other as the same people, especially when we start talking about West Africa. And then with other groups who we don't necessarily come from the same ethnic group, we can start seeing similarities there. And then when we start seeing commonalities with these colonizers and how they attack our indigenous institutions, then that could be something to organize around. So I would say that a big thing, and I know unfortunately celebrities have perverted this where they go and meet with the I guess the neo-colonist puppets, and they make it seem like returning back to Africa is this capitalist, project. But what we got to do is start going back and grounding with the people, start building with the people and identifying with them. So I think the major thing is that we have to create a relationship with those people. And as we develop our own relationship, not the celebrity and the puppet, but the working class people in Maryland or Chicago with the people in Congo, Guinea-Bissau, Nigeria, when we can have real life relationships with them that have nothing to do with religion, nothing to do with entertainment, but concrete relationships where we know each other's likes, dislikes, we know each other's culture, we can joke with one another and get to the point to where we do what Malcolm did. Because that's why Malcolm was able to organize the organization of Afro-American unity, because of the relationship. Because people forget that the Black radicalism of Harlem, right? It was cultivated by people like Arturo Schomburg and John Henry Clark. And that's why I believe Kwame Nkrumah, he learned with people like John Henry Clark, to where the reason why Nkrumah can come back to Harlem because of the relationship with Malcolm and John Henry Clark. So I think what we forget about how internationalism or Pan-Africanism operated from the 20s to the 70s and even up to, and I guess the 80s too, because we saw, like a Maurice Bishop and Thomas Sankara come back to Harlem. But those relationships started with them study groups where you had a John Henry Clark, a Malcolm X, a Carlos Cooks, a Kwame Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe. There was a lot of people who already had a real life personal relationship that we don't even realize. I mean, hell, even the idea of a Walter Rodney being in a CLR James study group, right? A lot of it is just creating the real relationships and identifying with each other as the same people. And even if we're different people, understanding that we have very similar subcultures. So I think it really gets to just a lot of just the on the ground work and being able to work around existing indigenous, institutions as well.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of short questions, and we'll ask you to keep them to 60 seconds or less, and then give you the opportunity to ask each other questions. All right. So the first question is, what are your thoughts on Afro-pessimism? And like I said, 60 seconds or less. I'll ask that one to Black Red Guard first.
Yeah, I haven't really studied that much about it. But from what I've seen, it seems to be rooted really heavily in postmodernism, which I kind of despise. I have had Frank Wilderson III recommended to me quite a few times. Maybe I should stop reading Maoist military theory and actually read about Afro-pessimism. But like Mao said, no investigation, no right to speak. So I will not speak on something that I have not thoroughly investigated.
Gotcha. Chris Marsh, how do you feel about Afro-pessimism? What are your thoughts?
I love Afro-pessimism. Afro-pessimism is a meta theory. It's a descriptive theory that fights against this idea of universal liberation and that anti-blackness permeates every group, every race, every society, and even it can turn into self-hatred. So what I think about Afro-pessimism is, as H. Rap Brown would say, die nigger die. That's what Frank Wilderson meant by, Afro-pessimism. He meant that it's a description. I think a lot of people see it solely from a nihilistic point of view, but it's just more so about a descriptive view of how other groups see us and how it manifests in terms of the power, just the power relationship, and it turns into anti-blackness because we don't have the power to give consequences to other groups who are racist and betray us and undermine our struggle.
And just like throwing in like 15 seconds more. Like, yeah, my main like beef with it from how I've seen it represented is that it seems to be a really, again, pessimism is literally right there in the name of the theory. And as Gonzalo said, I'm not really a big fan of him, but he said that revolutionaries have to be optimists. And yeah, while it's true that generally the world don't give a shit about black people, like I'm not really a fan of like theories that do not lend themselves to applicability in the real world, like Afro-pessimism itself. Um, it's mainly something that was developed at university campuses, like a lot of postmodernism. So like that type of thing, while it's good to like think about and study that type of stuff, I'm more concerned about like how can we end all of this shit? Like how can we end all of this exploitation and oppression? And if there's elements of Afro-pessimist theory that'll help towards that project, then I'll definitely support them. But by and large, yeah.
I'll spoil the answer for both. I'll spoil the answer for you. The answer is no. If have either of you heard of Maoist international ministries, and if so, what are your thoughts? 60 seconds. I'll put that to Black Red Guard first.
I've heard of them. They seem to be third worlders that write a lot. They have done quite a bit, it seems, of prison organizing work. But if I recall correctly, they were developed by they were founded by a guy that was at Harvard, and they've said a lot of basically my main beef with Maoism, third worldism, is that it doesn't, like every Maoist third worldist or MTW that I've come across basically is like, oh, it's useless to try to organize a revolution in the first world. Okay, so basically that relegates us to running our mouths on the internet. And I'm not a fan of running my mouth without action behind it. Furthermore, a lot of the Maoist third worldists of that particular tendency, notice I'm not conflating this with third worldism in general, which is basically meaning political projects developed by people in the third world. But Maoism, third worldism, a lot of these people tend to be lazy colonizers. They basically want black and brown people to do the work that they should be doing. So I've heard of MIM. They've said some pretty decent things and have some good analysis every now and then, but as a political project.
All right, Chris Marsh, yourself.
I mean, as Marx said, religion is the opiate of the masses. And I mean, I think people keep trying to do this liberation theology, but it just turns into, it turns into neocolonialism. And it's just something you really can't organize around. I think you got to really understand the relationship between religion and working class people, and it's always going to be exploitative. And the reason why we feel we need religion is because of the conditions, and it's just simply a coping mechanism. So I mean, we need religion like we need meth. That's what I think. So I think it's something that they just need to go ahead and throw away and just work on organizing around regular Maoism, if that's the thing they really want to organize around. But the whole liberation theology, man, y'all got to throw that away because it's methadone and heroin. It really is.
All right. And hang on. We had one more question, and then we'll ask you or allow you to ask short questions of each other, and then we can wrap up. The question was, what is the number one lesson that we can learn from the Panthers? Chris Marsh.
The number one lesson from the Panthers. Dang. To not believe in what the media says about opposing groups. If you have an issue like Black Red Guard talked about, we need to go to one another and talk with one another. Because a lot of Panthers, like Samuel Napier, like Alex Rackley, who else? There was a lot of Panthers who were called agents by other agents and were murdered. But because we went off of what people we didn't even really know that well, we went off their word, we ended up killing people who were central figures in the Panthers. So the number one lesson is that when we have issues, we can go to an Mbonji and really flesh these things out and figure them out. Because man, if we go off of what we see on the media, we go off on what our enemies say about each other. I mean, what our enemies say about us, then we'll end up making mistakes that we can't fix. So just if you have an issue with somebody, talk to them at your Mbungi, or talk to them in a space where both of y'all can be heard out and flesh out your problems privately, but don't do it, publicly.
Thank you, Black Red Guard.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I look at all of the bullshit on Twitter that people are talking about. Like, my position is this: if you have a real problem with somebody that is in an organization, why don't you reach out to their organization for a mediation process? There's constructive criticism and there's destructive criticism. So somebody said something mean to you, or somebody has not been doing something that they're supposed to have been doing, you have to, if the organization practices true democratic centralism, and if the organization wants to remain in good standing and keep its good reputation, it will work out these problems. So, yeah, I unite with Marsh's point. Like, don't believe what you hear in the
Oh, sorry about that. Looks like you broke up there for a little bit. Do you mind? I'll let you have like like 20 seconds just to respond to, or just to repeat the last point you made. Oh, it looks like BR Black Red Guard's got a little bit of technical difficulty. Oh, there you go. You're back.
All right. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Okay. No, we thought the feds got you.
No. Don't call that on me, as my grandma would say. But yeah, don't believe what you read on Twitter, what you hear from people that, like, and furthermore, like, if you've never organized with somebody, you've never actually met somebody in person, like, why would you be talking all this stuff? It's all sorts of, like, people call it COINTELPRO. I just call it pettiness. Like, a lot of people think everything's COINTELPRO right now. People doing COINTELPRO work for free. So, yeah, just be cautious when you're organizing about, for example, I saw a Twitter account today. It was titled @BRG Exposed. Like, what the fuck are you going to expose about me? And who the fuck are you? I've never met you. Probably some white kid feelings I hurt. So, yeah, that type of shit, it's not even like that. Like, back then, that was some real dangerous shit. Like, people would come to your house, and like you said, you mentioned Sam Napier, they'd set that dude on fire. Nowadays, it's just cancel culture bullshit. Oh, did you hear Black Red Guard said white women are ugly? Like, silly shit like that.
Yeah,
and
no, I
like,
got that.
it's just showing like the amateurishness of what's calling itself the movement. So we have to really sharpen up our organizations. We have to practice democratic centralism, and we have to be principled in our relationships, not just within people in our own little clique or org or whatever you want to call it, but with other people who have the same goal in mind that we have. And there's so much sectarianism, even in the Maoist movement, like, oh, I don't like you because you don't think Gonzalo is the fifth head, bruh. Like, I don't abide by fifth head thought. There is no fucking fifth head. If my five heads are Martin, Malcolm, Du Bois, Harriet, and Asada. Those are my 5 heads. So, like, what the fuck? It's just a bunch of silliness and amateurishness. And ultimately, the only way that we can combat that type of silliness and amateurishness is by uniting with and going deep among the people. That's ultimately how we can end this type of thing.
Absolutely. And did you two have any questions for each other? Anything over the course of the night that you wanted to respond to or question?
Oh, I definitely got a question, right? So with
If it's
one
about
of
Dr.
our,
Phil, I'm not answering it.
huh?
If it's about Dr. Phil, I'm not answering it.
Oh man, it's definitely. You know what? I did have a question. Like, I know one of our mutual people that we fell out with as being both hated black radicals, right? Um, what do you think about like this whole reemergence of hood communism and what you see with Black Agenda Report? Because one of the issues that I had not only with some of the black left groups was that I feel like, the whole situation with Ghazi and Black Hammer, I felt like places that could be really utilized for black organizing spaces became what you talk about as the whole Twitter bullshit, and everything becomes a joke. So I was interested to what what are your thoughts on the whole hood communists and Black Agenda Report industrial complex?
Oh, I think Black Agenda Report, they have some good stuff every now and then, but I don't like how they constantly cape for China. I don't know if they get money from the Chinese or what, but they need to stop that. Black folks really don't give a shit about what's going on, about defending China right now when it's us that's getting killed by the police. So, yeah, they're revisionists, but they have good stuff every now and then, and they do decent journalism.
I'm just going to go on record and say I feel very attacked by both statements. y'all see me doing the debunking on the timeline and whatnot, but I'll remove myself. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and in terms of hood communists, I actually used to write for them. I don't have any like personal antipathy towards any members of the collective, but Black Hammer is a cult. Okay, I'm going to say that Black Hammer is a cult. Anytime you have, like, first of all, they started, and you all are both familiar with Kevin Rashid Johnson, right? They started attacking this dude. They made up shit like claiming that he didn't exist and stuff like that. Okay, why would you tolerate somebody like that? Second of all, that whole Anne Frank thing, like, yeah, there is a whole racial dichotomy and dialectic within a Jewish community. But fuck a 14-year, like, why would you do that? Like, that is insane. Like, why? Like, what political purpose does that serve to help Black Ham? Like a fucking 14-year-old girl in the Netherlands. And they released their, like, somebody got Black Hammers, like, what they're trying to do. And their goal is basically to destroy other Black-led organizations. And I don't call nobody COINTELPRO without proof. That is something I do not do. But this is basically the fucking, you have listed isolate and break up and disrupt membership, and do all of this stuff. Like, I was just flabbergasted when I read that. And like, and I know some of the other comrades that are working with hood communists, there has to have been some sort of struggle within. I just didn't like it. It was liberalism. Ghazi is very good at making YouTube videos, so you're going to let him say all this stupid shit? Like, come on. There has to be some sort of principle, self-criticism, and stuff like that. Like, every time you look at Ghazi, he's in some type of drama. He is a tranny, and they love their bacchanal, but still. Ghazi, personally, he hasn't done anything to me personally, but like, it's just a matter of political principles. I don't wish the man any harm, but at the same time, Black Hammer is not a model for a good new African revolutionary organization. It reminds me of a lot of these Gonzaloite formations that basically see Gonzalo as the eighth head. Like, I read an interview with Ghazi where he literally said that he did not know what Marxism, Leninism, or Maoism are, but he also calls himself the queen of communism. So it's just a bunch of buffoonery. Ghazi is funny sometimes, but in terms of organization, no. And I've seen like videos of things that they've done, like picking a fight with anti-fascists in Colorado Springs, uh, asking Antifa to pay reparations. Like, what? What's the purpose of all of this? The other hood communist collectives, organizations that are in hood communist, I like the All African People's Revolutionary Party and Ujamaa. They're very good people, and I wish them well. I even wish Black Hammer well if it would stop being a cult. But anything that organizes Black people towards liberation and revolution, I support. And that's all I'll say about that. In terms of the anti-Semitism, yeah, that stuff really has no place. But I also find it hilarious how white people, whenever somebody like Louis Farrakhan says some off-the-wall shit, like they act like most of the people shooting up these synagogues ain't white. Like I've never heard of a Nation of Islam brother going up at a synagogue killing folks or anything like that. So, like, a lot of this stuff is just, you're just waiting for somebody to say something anti-Semitic. And yes, Ghazi is an anti-Semite, but also a lot of these people do not understand like the dynamic and the relationship between New African people and Jews. Like, if you go to a black barbershop on a Saturday, you will hear some funky shit. I'll just tell you that. But again, a lot of these white people, they haven't been around us. They don't know the dynamics within our communities. All they see shit and they react. They're reactionaries.
Got it. Did you have any questions for Chris Marsh?
Yeah. Why aren't you a Maoist?
Oh, I have a good. Okay, so where is it? Okay, not a Maoist because Mao sided with Mobutu.
Mao did side with Mobutu, but he also got into a lot of rightism, like again, line struggle within the party, and his biggest mistake, but this was the mistake of the Chinese Communist Party as a whole, was, now keep in mind, they split between the Soviets with the Soviets, right? Mainly because Khrushchev was doing a whole bunch of white folk shit. So let's say this. There's a big bear outside your door, and there's an eagle that's going to rip your eyes out over here. But the bear got up in your house. Like, keep in mind, the Soviet Union and China were right on top of each other. U.S. was across the ocean. So that was the root of that opportunism. Was it right? Absolutely not. And the Maoists back then, like, they were like, oh, the Angolan MPLA are the puppets of Soviet social imperialism. Like, bro, what the fuck is wrong with you? Or they were calling, like, the MPLA was based, dope. And they even started, like, when Pol Pot started killing up folks in Cambodia and Vietnam invaded them because Pol Pot sent his boys over to Cambodia to start massacring Vietnamese civilians. You had these dumb white Maoists over here that were like, oh, Vietnamese social imperialism. How the fuck is Vietnam imperialist? And they just fought 2 goddamn wars. So, yeah, that's, again, it segues back to dogmatism. But, yeah, Mao, not only in his later years, of course, the man was half senile by the time he died. But if in 1964, Mao would not have supported Mobutu. In 1974, yeah, he did, because he and the Chinese saw the U.S. as the lesser imperialist. Of course, that was a mistake on their part. They also backed the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and the Marcos dictatorship in the Philippines. As a matter of fact, if you've heard of the NPA, CPP in the Philippines, the Filipino Maoists, like, they had just popped off their shit in 1969. Like, they started their People's War in 1969. And Mao initially supported them. And it's not funny, but in 73, 74, okay, because they've been sending weapons and shit over there because the Philippines ain't nowhere from China. They cut off all the aid and they backed Marcos. I imagine the NPA, like, what the fuck? Like, so yeah, that was bad times. But again, it was Mao's fault because he did not, before he got sick, he died from Lou Gehrig's disease. Before he got sick, he did not clarify, like, okay, this is what's going to happen. Don't let these people take power. We got to uphold the proletarian revolutionary line. Like he was like, oh, fuck y'all, fuck China, fuck the world, nuke it all. He just dropped dead. And that laid the foundations for a mess. So yeah, in a way, it was his mess. It was his problem. But he could have handled it a lot better by like actually rooting this whole thing more in the masses and actually establishing some type of way to be like, okay, when I die, don't let this dude take over. Instead, it was chaos.
Yeah, okay, that makes yeah, that definitely makes a whole lot of sense because I was I think one of the things as black organizations got to learn how to navigate uh coalitions. And I'm more of thinking that the way coalitions are built have to be more strategic instead of moral. I just don't like this whole moral being everybody's friend, but actually having coalitions that have a means to an end, right? It's not to say that people don't have rights to fight against imperialism, but I just think too often, we get caught up into just loving people, but that's not enough.
Got that. And the final question before we can wrap up tonight, who would you both say are your top 5 rappers of all time? Chris Marsh, you go ahead.
Shoot, top 5. Oh man, okay. I want to say, man, okay. Definitely Yasin Bey. Definitely Blue Below the Heavens. Definitely 3 Stacks. Definitely Lupe Fiasco. And I would say, and probably Ghostface.
Okay. Black Red Guard, you're up next. Top 5.
Let me see. No Name, mainly because of her politics. I support political rappers. Boots Riley. Tupac. Akala, he's British. He's from he's British. And
he's from Jamaica. Or his family's from Jamaica.
And let me see who else. Number 1. Y'all expecting me to say Nelly because I'm from St. Louis. I can't stand that man. No. Cool Modi. I like Golden Age stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, that just about does it. I will say, thank you both. We went a bit over time. We're at 2 hours and 18 minutes, and I intended to keep it down to 2 hours. But honestly, like y'all were spitting so much truth that I simply could not cut down your answers in any way, shape, or form. Before we go, is there anything that you would like to plug, Black Red Guard? Any projects that you're working on? Any organizing that you're doing? Any events you'd like to plug?
If there's an FTP organization in your city, you should join it, especially if you're colonized.
All right, thank you very much. And Chris Marsh, anything that you would like to plug? I know that you've got a book coming. You're muted, bro.
Oh, so yeah, this is like a good starter. I'm part of, a great thing we did was really unifying and starting to put some theory to practice with the Kofi Pasa, the Kofi Pasa research team, Masi Warrior Clan, and we're able to really work towards really, politicizing the conscious community, right? So I wrote 2 chapters. It's resistance with affection and the science of self-preservation, right? And basically, I'm basically going through the psychological and the physical, liberation of our people, and just giving us a lot of different solutions from George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, Huey Newton, Cabral, like Sophia Bakari, Wangari, Maathai, Marimba Ani, Wade Nobles, Amos Wilson, A-Trap Brown, Kwame Ture, and I mean, there's a lot of practical things that can be applied. So it goes toward really part of what I do with my Patreon is really work toward archiving, and what we're going to start doing is eventually creating bigger archives so Black scholars and Black revolutionaries have places to go to access out of print books and stuff like that. Yeah, that's basically it. Oh, the Omni African Collective Study Group, that's on Omni African TV. The Patreon is Omni African. My Patreon is patreon.c/Marsh. Boycott Forgiveness. That's basically my blog where I just be going to fuck in. A lot of shit that I write on there is gonna fuck people's day up, or it's gonna inspire you to tear shit up. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, just fuck with the study group. And the main thing we advocate for is building competent all Black revolutionary organizations and helping other organizations with their study group. You know, No Name could have reached out to us, who was in fucking Bronzeville while we was in High Park, but I'm gonna leave that alone. You know, but just some crazy coincidences. But yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know that I learned a lot tonight, and I hope the viewers got a hell of a lot out of it. There is going to be a VOD of this stream. Also, make sure that it gets uploaded to our YouTube channel as well. We'll be going through it over the weekend and taking some very strong clips and whatnot. But thank you both. I really do appreciate this. I'm glad we were able to put this together.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing, man. If you want to do it again, I'll be free. I love to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, y'all. You have yourselves a good night, and we'll talk soon.
You too.
Peace.
Peace.